Hello, everybody, and welcome. Today we have something very special. So it's myself, Jamie, and I have with me a guest, Jeremy McDonald, whom you'll be familiar with by now, because although it's not released yet, by the time you're watching this, his previous interview will be released, and it's a very good one. But today we're talking about religion and the part that religion has played in our lives and where we're at today. So it's going to be very interesting. And that is what we are discussing today. So, Jeremy, welcome to today's interview. Thank you for coming back. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
why don't we start? Yeah. Okay, thanks. I appreciate you being here. So, why don't we begin with if you want to tell the story of how religion came into your life, a little bit about it and where you're at now with all of
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. So my mother, when I was about, I guess, about 6 or 7 years old, I'd come home from school, and during school you have these little Valentine's Day cards that you get, and I remember having them hanging all over my wall because they thought they were special, and I got them from school and all that kind of stuff. And my mother told me that I had to take them down. And Valentine's Day also happens to be just a couple weeks away from my birthday, so I think I was getting ready to turn 8, and she told me we weren't going to be celebrating my birthday that year. And so I was shocked, of course, being 7 years old, getting ready to turn 8. And she said that she was getting ready to go back into the church that she was raised in. Um, and as a result of that, the church did not believe. They thought that Valentine's Day, birthdays, Christmas, all those holidays were pagan, and as a result of following those holidays, she was actually, if she continued to do
She
this,
continued to do
she would
that.
be putting
It would be
me and her in danger of being burned in a lake of fire for eternity for sinning. And so that was the what this particular church
this
believed.
particular church believed.
And it was a church
Yeah.
called the Worldwide Church of God. Now it's in the 90s. It broke off into many different sects. One of us called the United Church of God, the Church of the Living God. They're all different parts of this. Herbert W. Armstrong was the self-proclaimed apostle of this movement, and he said he was ordained by God to basically be this apostle of the new movement of God, and stuff like that. So, but he had a lot of rules. He was raised a Quaker. He and back in he was born in the 1800s, the late 1800s, and passed away in 1986. And in his late 90s, and so he basically didn't think women should wear makeup. Women shouldn't wear their skirts above their knees. There was all kinds of rules. They had to wear pantyhose because it wasn't proper for them to do that. I could go on and on and on and on and on and on. There's just
Mm,
a lot of
lots of
stories
rules.
that go along with this. Why this particular church is very damaging, especially to myself and my family, is that in 1968, my mother, when I was 8, I would have been like, it would have been like roughly 1981, 1982. My mother, my mother's parents, my grandfather was told by the pastor of the church that he had to get a divorce from my
It's
grandmother
from my grandma.
because my grandmother had
My
previously
grandmother
been married. She had
had
married a man
she
when she was
married a man
17 just to get out of the house. And long story short, she got out of the house, and then that marriage got annulled
that I
because
know
of a
because
whole bunch of other
of
stuff
what
that was
went
going
through.
on. Anyways, they said that there was a sin against God for her
That's
to
God
be
for her
previously
previous.
married unless her husband had died, which he didn't. He was still very much alive, or her previous husband, and that he was
He
condemning,
was
by staying married to my
like
grandmother, he was condemning my family, my
family
grandmother, him, my uncle, and my mother to burn in a lake of fire for an eternity. So, and that's basically fear tactics from this church. He had built this church up to
to
120,000 people and
120.
thought that they were the chosen 144,000 people. Had flown all over the world, met heads of state, stayed in kings' palaces with them,
Palaces with
had a
them.
Learjet,
And
all on the church's money. And so,
so
where it was particularly
where was
damaging to me is I had grew up with this idea of that we were
I'm
sinful.
sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, sorry. I just want to, I hate to break you there because this is very interesting, but there's like this tick. I don't know if it's from you or from me. Can you
Get some
hear it on your
feedback,
end?
a little bit of feedback.
Sorry?
Yeah,
Oh,
there's a
there
little bit of
is?
feedback.
Okay.
Yeah, on my voice. So I don't know how
Oh, okay.
to
I
fix.
don't know if let me try some headphones and see if it makes a
Let me
difference.
try
Let
one
me
thing
try.
too.
Thank you. Okay.
Make sure I'm on the right for audio.
Oh, okay. It's just uh
So yeah,
to
I am on the headset, so I just want to make sure that I'm on the headset. How's
yeah.
that? That's probably better.
I think it is, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's
Anyway,
a better sound.
oh, great, great.
Those
Thank
those
you.
feed.
Okay, so
Yeah, so when we start looking at all of this stuff, where this man in this church and the leadership of this church are benefiting from the money that we're giving the church to do this ministry, instead of using it to help feed people that need food. I mean, they were doing that too, but um, they were really just kind of making themselves celebrities and flying all over the world and making themselves rich, and then
mm,
creating all of these ideas. Now, he wrote a book called The Human Potential to Become God. And basically, so in
mhm,
that path, he had some decent ideas, but it took, and so that I kept on holding on to him as a great idea because I met him when I was a kid too. He passed away in 1986, but when he got his second divorce, because his first wife had passed away, he got married again to his secretary. He was in his 80s. He married his
mm,
20 something year old secretary, or 30 something year old secretary, which I have no problems with age
wow.
difference. That's up to
No.
them. But what I did have a
Mm,
problem with is in 2013, I started looking up something stuff about him, and I found out that he had to admit in his second divorce on a court of law, so he was sworn to tell the truth, that he had molested his daughter, um, and
mm,
his when she was a kid. And so it was very, that just hit me really hard. And then I started thinking about my life and about how this church had messed up my family. That, I had, like a lot of, LGBTQ kids, were raised in Christian churches where we were told that basically our way of living was wrong against God. And I'd already proven to myself that that wasn't true. I had done that many years prior. But then this overwhelming amount of anger came through. And so this is roughly about 10 years ago. This anger came through, and I started thinking, this man had the nerve to tell us what we were going to go basically be tortured for eternity, and that he
mm,
was doing something just as bad. And he actually said in the court of law, when they asked him the question, did he do this to his daughter? He said his response to avoid the question was, I've not always been close to God. And so until they finally forced him into saying, yes, I did it. And so I started, but then it really starts to make you think. These are narcissistic tendencies, and
mhm,
narcissists will gaslight you. They will push you into doing something and make you feel guilty about doing something they say you're doing wrong, and they're behind your back. They're not an angel themselves, and
no.
so
But
it's one of the
plus a
so.
messiah complex.
Yes. Yeah, very much a
Mm,
messiah complex. And so,
mm,
and in my own spiritual journey, I've learned that, we're all teachers and healers, and we're all students and people learning and growing and stuff like that. And so, we really got to start looking at, if somebody's telling you that their way of living and their way of doing things is better than yours, and pushes you and gaslights you into being what they think you should be, then run. And so it's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
they should allow you to sit in your own, learn and give sermon. And a lot of these churches, like mine in particular, I have family that's still in that church, and I do love my family, but I
Mm,
start to look at this and see, when we talk about waking up is waking up to who you are as a soul, and your
mm,
eternal essence. And that church, and the churches I've seen from other clients that I've worked with to help heal this type of damage, they're they're not awake to who they are. And that's what you got to get them to do. You got to get them to really start looking at it. But that's, I could go on and on and on about that particular church. I remember sitting there when I was 11 years old, and I knew I was different. I knew I didn't like girls in the same way that other people did, the other boys in the
mm,
class did. And I remember sitting there with this heavy guilt just for being a young boy and doing things that young boys do, teenagers do. I would feel guilty about doing that. And I just felt like I was just this horrible person. That's not something a child should have to experience. And so my mother is actually, believe it or not, the one that got us out of this. She brought it into it because she was afraid, because she thought that she was condemning us because she was still programmed from being a kid. And then when I was about 14 or 15 years old, she left that church. I can
mm,
hardly believe that any God that I want to be, to look up to, would kill and torture his own children because they didn't do exactly what he wanted them to do. That seems like a childish God, an immature God, and a murdering God. And she goes, and I don't want to follow
mm,
somebody like that. So my mother was starting to wake up to who she was. And
mm,
that's really what people have to, and she stood in her own empowerment. But it took her years to really heal that before she passed away at 54, because she really started making that realization in probably, I would say, her 30s.
mm,
Late 20s, early 30s. 'Cause I would have been, and when I was 14, well, she would have been 30 years old when I was 14 or 15. So,
mm.
because she was very young. So, um, but yeah, that's and I know you've had
Yeah.
similar experiences. So, you know,
Oh, I have, and I'm looking forward to sharing that. But may I ask a couple of questions based on what you've said,
ab-
before
absolutely.
we move on to mine, because you got a fascinating story. So
Yeah.
thanks for sharing it. So I have a couple of questions. So first of all, like, so what I've gathered from what you said is that, you had a lot of hypocrisy, criminality, even inside the church with the leadership, and
Mhm.
so, some very unsavory people, and you know a lot of threats of hell and damnation and this kind of thing. Okay,
Mhm.
so that's obviously very, very off-putting. Okay, to say the least. But how did what about the actual content of the sermons? Like, um, if you put aside the way people behaved and just kind of was oblivious to it, and you get down to the actual content of the doctrine of the church and what's being taught, like, how did you feel about that?
So this is interesting because
Mm,
that's actually a
mm,
very good question. I remember
mhm,
being probably about that age, younger, and so I remember we went to a church location in Mount Vernon, Illinois, and I remember listening to that. He had a whole. Do you guys remember the old? I don't know if you remember the old slides with the projector where you'd project the slide up on the wall, type of thing. Those old days.
mm,
He had
mhm,
different things. He was
yeah.
talking about how rock and roll. Um, was basically going to seed your children's mind and bring the devil into their mind. And he
Oh,
would literally talk about, they would listen to the record playing backwards and show the demonic things that were being said. And then
mm,
though I remember another sermon that they were talking about. It was about the very first Indiana Jones movie and about how to have 110 scenes of violence in it, and that was going to seed the devil in your mind. And so
oh,
never anything about how, and it really, Christianity hasn't changed much. I mean, there are people that are very decent, good people in Christianity, and I'm not to say, because I don't want to take that away. And I've studied Christian text, since then, and found it's nothing like what they're teaching. And
yeah,
so they really,
absolutely.
but what I found is that it was all about fear and propaganda, all with the idea, and their doctrine is that eventually one day God's going to call the 144,000. And I think this is similar to Jehovah's Witness, but I not
Mm,
100%
it
sure.
is.
But and so
No, it is.
they're going to call 144,000 to a place of
Thank you.
safety. And it
Yeah.
was going to come like a thief in a night. It was one day that we were
Mm,
not going to know when and how and where it was going to happen. We'll just know if you're called to be saved from this tribulation of pain and suffering, that
yeah.
you would, those 144,000. Now, Now, even though it's told that they don't know when it's going to happen, I'm going to be rude here a little bit. These idiots kept on trying to figure out where it was going to be, you know, and
Yeah,
so
right.
and a lot of them thought it was going to. They were convinced it was Jordan, and the Petra in Jordan, and that was
Mhm.
going to be where they were going to be. And while the whole world was falling apart, we were going to be saved by God and protected by God. And I sit
Mm.
there and I now as an adult I'm like, why this is a fairy tale that we're believing in. You know, that people are actually
Mm.
believing in some kind of fairy tale. And so
Mm.
and then it was just and then eventually God was going to rise everybody when it became God's kingdom. Everybody was one
Yeah.
of those 144,000. They would become gods of their own planet.
Mhm.
And and so they just had this whole idea of
Mm.
stuff that that was their reward. And then there was going to be three resurrections. One was going to be the resurrection for the people that follow God and weren't sinners and followed to the letter of the word of God and all that kind of stuff. And the second resurrection was going to be for people that so they could repent and fall down on their knees and ask for forgiveness, and then he was going to let them live. The third resurrection is going to be the people for that never could be forgiven, like homosexuals and people like that. And then they were going to be thrown
Right.
in a lake of fire and burned forever. And
Wow.
and so it was and so it was literally about all this spitefulness from a supposed loving God. And so it's a little bit
Absolutely.
twisted from the average Christian religion, but it's still similar in fire and brimstone. So
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
agree.
So
I
no,
agree. Actually,
I didn't believe anything that they taught.
no,
And it's
right, right. Okay, yeah, interesting. And actually, you mentioned something else previously, and I just want to go back to that because you said that you had proven LGBT is not wrong years previous, you said, because obviously they were very anti-homosexual and LGBT and all that. And you made a comment that you had already proven years previous that it was not wrong. So my question is, did you prove it biblically, or was that more as you kind of expanded your mind and went into various other kind of spiritual practices, or what?
It's twofold. So
Like,
prior
what?
to
Wait,
that, I'd
yeah,
proven it
okay,
biblically. I'd proven it biblically. So it says the one scripture that
okay,
they use is in Leviticus, and it's "Man shall not lie with man." And
yeah,
so you can prove that in a sense that this is ancient times, and at that time they were big on procreation of the people.
hmm,
We needed more
yeah,
people on the planet. Um,
yeah,
and then they also use Sodom and Gomorrah as a way to attack, the LGBTQ community. Now, keep in mind, it says
right,
nowhere in the Bible about anything about lesbians. So, nowhere does
hmm,
it say anything about it's wrong to be a lesbian. It only says man shall not lie with man, which they twist that whole verse. So that's here. I'll say that in a second. That's the second part of this. So,
yeah,
the first part of it is, and there's a bishop of the uh, um, basically the Church of England, but they call it the Episcopalians here in the United States. Is that he's
hmm,
Spong, I think is Bishop Spong is his name, but he basically came out and he said you shouldn't, first of all, you shouldn't be following the Bible by the letter of the word. You should be following it by the feeling or the essence of it. And he said
okay,
back then you would have made it, you might have had a rule that said, man shall not lie with man, and it's not an abomination meaning you're going to die. It's taweva, which in Hebrew means it means taboo. Well, it's also taboo for me to say to f off, so but I'm not going to be burned
right,
in eternal hell for it. And so
no,
it's one of those things. But second fold to this, or the Sodom and Gomorrah wasn't about gay people. It was
mhm,
about literally they were going to rape and molest young children, because Lot was going to send his kids out, instead of them taking the angels. They were going to molest and rape the angels, and so
that's
this
right.
pure essence of energy. So,
Mm,
but since then, I've really studied a lot of alchemy, and so you have to keep in mind the ancient Hebrews were very much into alchemy and ascending the mind and the body and the spirit into
mm,
a different state of being. And they were not what Christianity is today. And so They used to have what were called tarot. They had tarot cards, and they called them books of wisdom. They weren't necessarily called tarot, but they were similar to that, where they could actually see and scry
Mhm.
into the future and give a lot of information. But
Mm.
so, in essence of alchemy, you have the right and left hemisphere of the brain, which is the divine feminine, divine masculine. And so
Mhm.
if the left hemisphere is divine masculine, that's the logical way of thinking. That is I set an intention, I'm going to do this, this is the goal of way that it is. And then the divine feminine or the right hemisphere is what happens when that starts to connect when things become second nature. So when you learn how to drive, you learn with your left brain. You think, oh, I got to do my brake. I got to check my mirror. If I'm in the United States, I
Mm.
drive on one side of the road. If I'm in the United Kingdom, I drive on the other side of the road. You have to kind of
Mm.
start
Mm.
thinking about that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
what happens is that if you cannot have a whole balanced life if you are just operating from the left hemisphere, the divine masculine. And so,
Mm.
if that's true, and I know it is, because you can't have one without the other. Now, through eternity, through spirit, through what we've seen and throughout history, we've suppressed and oppressed the divine feminine, because in the ancient Christians, the divine feminine was called Sophia, and the masculine was called Elohim. And so in Elohim,
Mm.
or the El stands for shining one. So
Mm.
what ends up happening is that if you have man shall not lie with man because it's an abomination, if the only operating from a divine masculine perspective and only that, and never allowing the divine feminine in there, you surely will die. Well, look at our planet.
Mm.
We operate it from a masculine point of view, only logical, only things we can see with our five senses. We don't necessarily feel things. People are creating these entire churches on word-based churches, only follow it to the letter of the word, even though the Bible says something
Mm.
totally different. And so,
Mhm.
and you cannot convince them. I just had there's a man just put out a book that says "You Are God," and he's getting attacked on social media right now because how dare
Mm.
he say that we're all God, even though it says in their
Mm.
own Bible, it says
It
in
does.
two different scriptures, "You are God." But you can give that to them. They will argue. They will say, no, that's God as in little g, not big G. And I'm like, nice try, but there was no little g in the Hebrew language. so,
Mm.
uh,
Yeah, that's
and
right.
so, and so what they do is they will sit there and argue, but they're blinded. And
Mhm.
so now I look back at my church, and this is part of how I healed, as I started thinking, they were blinded, and they were being manipulated by narcissistic people that wanted to keep them enslaved, and they wanted to fly all around the world. And this is very similar to the kings and queens and the presidents and governments of the world. They want to keep us all oppressed. And so I feel like
Mm.
mine and yours and Daniela's work is to rise people up and empower
Mhm.
them. I don't want to
Yeah,
be the
absolutely.
Messiah. I don't want to be a Messiah. I want to go up and speak on my stage and go out and get a beer, and I want to just be a
Yeah,
guy. you know,
that's
so
right. That's right.
uh,
That's right. Well, like, I know this is a little bit harsh, but I do feel that there is a pandemic. It's been going on a long time, and that pandemic
mm,
is religion. And, Jesus said that he came to set the captives free. He came to save. And, for many, many years, I said that, like, oh, yeah, be saved, and like people like knock that word around about being saved, getting saved. I'm
mm,
saved. Are you saved? And like, I never really gave it much thought as to what it meant, but I believe that Jesus was saving people from the law of Moses, from the from religion,
mhm,
and that's he's setting the captives free because we can be so much more. We are, well, we were slaves, and many of us still are slaves. The Abrahamic religions make up a lot of people on this planet. There's a lot of people in bondage,
mhm.
following this, and
Yeah,
they're okay. They don't. We there is no threat of hellfire, but a lot of people are, you know, obviously very frightened of that. You
every
know,
religion on the planet has a hell in it, with the exception of the Jewish
yeah,
one.
Oh,
that
okay.
denied them.
Okay.
And so there is no such we living in hell if you want it to be hell. And
Sure.
I think we were talking about in our show a couple weeks ago. I just got done watching the show Lucifer, and it's the most
Oh, brilliant
eye-opening show
show.
because it's exactly how I felt. This entity, Lucifer, which means
Mhm.
morning light.
Yeah.
The story is that God cast him down into hell, and then referred changed his name to Satan, and Satan means
Yeah.
enemy. And so if you really think
Yeah.
about if you're divine, you've literally that's your lower chakras
Mhm.
and your energy of that. And but in the
Mm.
show, he's going through this whole I'm
Mhm.
mad at daddy type of thing. And it's really dad didn't cast him down there. He put himself down there and he could leave at any point in time. And
Yeah.
the demons could leave at any point in time, and the people there in hell could leave at any time, but they sit in their torture. And as Albert Einstein said, the definition of insanity is to continue to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results. But in this particular scenario in this show, they repeat the story, their hell over and over again, whatever they're feeling guilty about. Well, then it starts.
Yeah.
If you go into all the other religions, they weigh your heart based on a feather in order to get into the afterlife. Well, you can't get into the afterlife if you're heavy-hearted. And the reason being is
Mhm.
because you need to be light and energetically light so you can go back almost I believe that the soul can go back and forth between the physical flesh and the
Mhm.
spirit. And I don't believe
Mhm.
it, I know it. And it's one of those
Yeah.
things where
Sure.
they if they keep us at this idea at odds with each other, and you're wrong and I'm right, and this is the evil in the world, and this is the it's okay to be mindful and understanding things, but
Mhm.
if I hadn't had that epiphany about the church, I wouldn't have realized that they were my oppressor. They were the ones that
Mm.
put me there because they're heavy in their hearts. And so what
Yeah.
can I do for them to help them? I can work on myself. I can work on
Yeah.
myself. I can get lighter energetically. I can be an example for me, not for anybody else. And hopefully, some people will see it and it'll touch their lives and it'll help heal them. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Absolutely. Do you know,
yeah.
interestingly, Jesus and Lucifer had the same titles of bright and morning star and light bearer.
Hmm.
And you know, interestingly, so Lucifer was cast out of heaven. History is always written by the winners. Was he cast out of heaven or did he leave in protest? You know,
Hmm.
I know you were talking about the symbolism of the root chakra and all that. You know, there's like many ways to dice it up, I suppose. But yeah, I definitely think that, of course, you know, the Bible's not going to speak kindly of Lucifer. Jesus, he very much opposed Yahweh. There's
Hmm.
tons of scriptures about that, and of course, so did Lucifer as well. Um, is Lucifer the serpent? Not sure, but definitely there was talks about war in heaven and you know the Elohim. Interesting. You talked about the Elohim. I know we're going to exchange stories, and I'll tell my story in just a moment. But you said that El meant like shining one. Did you say?
Shining one.
But
Yeah.
there's a lot there's like a whole discussion to be had on Elohim, and it's very interesting. So it translates like plural, which is like
Mhm.
also confirmed by the fact that in the Genesis creation story it's always we and us, so that's
Mhm.
plural. Elohim is plural, and I heard that it was translated powerful ones.
You can
And I've
have that
heard
one
others
too.
say
Yeah.
other things,
Yeah.
but yeah, have you heard that
Yeah.
one? Yeah.
Yeah. Because
But,
listen,
like,
think
there
about
were many gods.
the EL as Gabriel, Michael, Ezekiel.
Mhm.
The EL is at the other one. So powerful one or shining ones is ones who've stepped into their own empowerment.
Right.
So,
Oh,
you
I
know,
see. I
I don't know.
see.
That's just
Yeah.
how it rolls off the tongue.
Yeah. No,
So,
no, it is. No, it's good. But, Jehovah, Yahweh, he acknowledged other gods, and, you know, this whole monotheism thing is very strange to me because it's new. Monotheism, like, isn't really biblical at all. It's just because the Bible writers don't translate they wherever like the word God is, they just translate it God or Lord. But there's multiple names for God, but they're not just different names. Like you know, you would have like a few nicknames. They're different entities completely. You know, there's a whole entire race that came, like the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to
Anunnaki.
earth came, and yeah,
Zachariah
there was
Sitchin.
like a whole. Sorry.
Zachariah Sitchin. He's the
Yeah,
one that
yeah,
started, yeah,
yeah.
the Anunnaki. Yeah. Yeah,
It is, and it's funny. All the religions tell a very similar creation story, don't they?
they do. They do. They
But
do. But look
but
at what I know.
digress.
It was not just Constantine. It would the
Yeah,
Bible was canonized 3 times over 1100 years. So as much as they try to control,
I didn't know that. Hmm.
as much as they try to control, and that's not including King James. That's a whole other story. But Constantine
Wow.
was the third time that, and then he not only did he canonize it a third time with the Council of Nicaea, but he moved his dang capital from Rome to Constantinople, and started the beginnings of the Eastern and Western Empire, which one side was the Byzantine Empire and the other one was the old school. So when you really think about it, why did he do
Hmm.
that? Because he was this Christian movement was coming along and he was losing control of his empire, and so
Mm.
he had to come up with something to scare us. And Catholic means universal church, and so basically he blended pagan beliefs. And then the story in the
Mm.
Catholics is that he had a Jesus experience, and because he had a Jesus
Mhm.
experience he brought Christianity to Rome. No, he was pissed because he was
Yes,
losing
because he was
control.
losing control.
And
Mm.
the Romans were famous for this. The Romans did things, and I'm sure you'll
Things, and I'm
recognize
sure
this because this is in
this
modern
because
times. The Romans did things like
Mhm.
every Roman was supposed to get grain that they shipped in from Egypt. If you were a Roman
Mhm.
citizen, you got grain every single month to feed your family. But what they would
Mhm.
do to scare the people of Rome is they would say, "We're having a shortage," and only the elite started getting grain, and then the people that were poorer got less grain. And so they were creating a
Mm.
food shortage and a food crisis. Does that sound familiar? Because it's happening in the United States.
Mm.
They're burning crops.
Mm.
They're doing, and you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to figure this out, because all you have to do
Mm.
is see it. There's an egg shortage. I mean, our gas shortage. Somebody just posted that we're almost $4 a gallon. That's not new. They started that in the 70s. When they were having people stand in
Mhm.
lines for gas. So they do these literally forced traumas or things, and then we could go down, that's a whole other path that we could go down to create fear. And then they and the greatest fear is a fear of damnation. And most
Mhm.
people don't even care what's going to happen to them. They're more concerned about their kids and their loved
Mm.
ones and the people that they
ones and
they
people that
care about. And so now in the United States, they're doing, I don't know what they're doing
I
over
don't know
in
what
the
they're
United
doing
Kingdom,
over
but
in the United
I know
Kingdom,
in the
but
United States, they use children as a means to scare people, and say, "Oh, we have to protect the children," and that kind of stuff. And it's both sides that both
Wow.
political parties do it, and religion pushes that to the limits. And so
Oh
it's
yeah.
one of those things. And so I'm not going to say that everybody in religion is bad, because I can't say that. But what I do know is the institutions themselves are not healthy at all.
Mm.
So
No, 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 absolutely. Well, yeah. You see, like I do believe that Yahweh of the Old Testament, um, it is all. Well, this is my feeling on it. Like it is literal. It was real. It did happen. There's like
mm,
historical evidence, archaeological
mhm.
evidence. Um, but that's frightening. I wish it wasn't, but I do believe it was. But you know, he was a very not a nice character, and certainly not the
No,
Almighty God.
no, he
Because
wasn't.
Jesus, well, in the New Testament, there's a different word for God. The word Yahweh doesn't even appear in the New Testament. It's a different word
Mm.
that translates to basically divine source, the
Yeah,
universe.
that's exactly, and that's
Uh,
what Jesus was
and
trying to teach, is the divine source. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I do think that there's a lot of evidence, and it's too much for probably one podcast, but um, Yahweh was a mortal being. Probably lived for 900. They all lived for like 900 years, didn't they, in the Old Testament? But yeah, he held a position in the council. They were colonizers, the Elohim, and yeah, they were here to exploit and do what they did, and Yahweh had his people and his. Well, he didn't actually have any territory, but yeah, and it's terrible. But Jesus said, "My Father is not your Father," and I think the frightening thing is that um, Christians today are generally very kind and loving and law abiding, and certainly don't like want to slit sheep's throats or anything like that. But they justify all the atrocities and violence in the Bible in the Old Testament, and there's this marriage of the Old Testament and the New Testament, and they sort of seamlessly tied it together. Um, and it is terrible because people. I've had many discussions with people, and I asked the question, what's the moral justification for God doing this in this land? This terrible genocide, and it's not only genocide, but they take the virgins, they get slaves, and they do they kill every animal as well. It's like pretty horror stories really, and they look me in the eye and they say, oh well, they must have been evil. God had his reasons, and they actually
Mhm.
justify it. You know, um,
Yeah,
and I think it's sad. Yeah,
yeah.
and
Well, they're supposed to be. The New Testament's supposed to be the new covenant, and you're
yeah.
absolutely right. Jesus is talking about a source,
Mm,
and
mm,
Christ consciousness. Christ is not a last
mm.
name.
No.
It's an essence of the divine that he was Christed. And it's interesting that the serpent is basically our spine. If you took our spine and took it out of our body and threw it on the ground, it would look like a serpent.
Mhm.
Well, that's the
Right.
Kundalini energy, or the River Jordan when he was baptized by John the Baptist. That's the Kundalini energy waking up. He was baptized and Christed, and so that's when he became the changed from the Son of God to the begotten Son of God. Begotten just means Christed, and so
Oh,
what? And
interesting.
so we can transfigure that in ourselves. That's alchemy, and that's what they don't want you to say.
Wow.
They want you to act like Jesus is the only way to do it, and he's the only way, and he's basically saying, "Come on, guys, you're just like me. Come follow me. You don't have to fall into. I'm just trying to give you the lily pads to jump on to
Mm.
create the path, so you don't fall into the trap of hell, which is your own
Yeah.
eternal ideas of torture and anguish." And so he's saying
Wow.
and he also says in Matthew 7, this also says in Matthew 7 that there's a narrow path. And so
Mm.
that narrow path is basically the middle of the yin and yang, the light and the dark. And so, and if
Mm.
you stay on that middle path, you'll always be in the balance of the essence, the whole essence of you, who you are. And Jesus is saying, he's saying that, hey, dance with me and I'll help you get out here. He's not saying fall at your knees to me. He's saying walk as my brothers and sisters next to me.
Wow.
And
See, Jeremy, you yeah, no, I'm sorry.
you're fine.
I was just going to say, like, you've eaten from the tree of knowledge, which is exactly what we were forbidden to do by Yahweh way back,
Mhm.
you know.
Yes.
But you've obviously eaten from the tree of knowledge, and when you mentioned the serpent, the Kundalini, and all that, yeah, it made me think of that, and you know, like all through the Old Testament, the Elohim, the bad side, because I'm sure there's some good ones, but they were forever trying to stifle humanity's advancement. Tower of Babel, wiping out, genociding the whole earth with the flood. But yeah, the tree of knowledge. Yeah. I think that,
Isn't
that
it?
that's
It's
what,
fascinating. Isn't it
yeah,
fascinating?
it is. It's fascinating, and definitely Jesus wants us to eat of the tree of knowledge. He didn't say it like in plain words, but he was encouraged. He wants us to have knowledge. I'm reading the Gnostic books at the moment, man, and it is all about enlightenment and knowledge, and it's just so different to what our churches teach us. That they don't. They just want you to be obedient. They just teach, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Well, that's fucked up right there. Um,
Mhm.
you know, and it's just it's fear and obedience, isn't it? Is what pleases God, but it's very very different in when we
But
get down to Jesus. And yeah, carry on.
yeah, it's so fascinating. But it even says that in the prodigal, when it's the story of the prodigal son, and he
Yeah.
said the one son leaves and comes back, and the other one helped him tend the fields, and the other one comes back and he
Mm.
says, he hugs him. And the son that stayed with him was jealous. He was like, "How could you do this? I stayed here with you all this time." And he was like, "Because he's my son." And that's what a loving father does. He doesn't burn you in eternal fire. He doesn't, I mean, even though a parent might ground you or put you on restriction or, give you a swat on the butt when you're a baby or something like that, it's not meant to
Yeah.
be harmful. It's meant to say, hey, I don't want you to hurt yourself. And when you get to be an adult, I want you to be able to have enough tools to be able to be discernful enough to actually do this dance. And
Mm.
so, but it doesn't throw you in fire. God's got eternal
Mm.
amounts of time. If that's the way they're teaching, the God's immortal and all knowing and all powerful and all that stuff, He already knows what you're gonna do, and he or
Mm.
she, whatever you want to refer to it as, and you're right, Elohim does mean more than one, and then when you start going into the angels, or I like to call them angles of light as opposed to the word angel.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so it just this subject gets me excited if you can't tell.
Oh yeah, no, I can. I think when we meet, we'll have many, many late nights discussing this
Yeah,
because it is
that's okay.
fascinating. I
We'll
agree.
get
But yeah,
we'll
may
get
I?
Daniela we'll get Daniela some drinks in her and she'll go pass out.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah. I'll tell my story of yeah, I
yeah,
was a
absolutely.
Jehovah's Witness. Okay, so basically I was a Jehovah's Witness, and it's interesting because there were synchronicities that along my journey of what was actually very toxic. But I believe that everything that has happened in my life is for such a time as this, because you wouldn't really know that of the toxicity and everything had you not been in it. But I remember praying to God when I was a very little boy. Um, I can't remember how old, but I was very small, and I prayed to God, and I said, God, I want to know you. I want to, I want to learn about you and stuff. A very childlike, prayer. Very sincere, and um, and then what happened was Jehovah's Witnesses knocked on the door, and I thought, wow, I mean, I didn't know what the word synchronicity meant, but basically I saw it as a huge synchronicity, a sign from God. Oh my goodness, this is the true religion because I just prayed last night and this is the answer to my prayer. So the Jehovah's Witnesses knocked on my door. Well, one thing led to another. I was fully immersed as a Jehovah's Witness and knocking on doors myself. Yeah. I was like hook, line, and sinker for the Jehovah's Witnesses. And very similar to your story, couldn't do birthdays, couldn't do Christmas, couldn't do Halloween, couldn't watch unsavory things on the TV. Very, yes, there was a dress code. Meeting attendance was mandatory. You had all this stuff. It was like, harsh, very strict rules. Um, they also believed in the 144,000. Um, Very similar. And I've noticed a lot of these, I don't know if you would class it as a cult, but I don't even know what the word cult means really. People throw that word around a lot, but I've noticed that these types of sects, I'll call them sects, um, because they're like offshoots from mainstream, but they all have very similar things in common. And one thing that makes me laugh is that they all believe that they have exclusive favor with God, and like you could be like a different type of Christian, very similar, but not in their denomination, and they would believe you're going to hell. So you believe in Jesus, you believe in God, you believe, blah blah blah. You read the Bible, you live a nice life. Well, that's not good enough because you're not a Jehovah's Witness or you're not this or that. And so, like, you're going to burn. So the Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't believe in hell, actually. So,
Mhm.
credits to them for that. They believe that if you're not a Jehovah's Witness, because it doesn't matter what the hell you do, you got to be a Jehovah's Witness. Interestingly, it was only invented in the 1800s. So God knows about everyone who ever lived and died on the planet prior to that. They're screwed, I guess, no matter how nice they were.
Right.
But you know what I mean? Yeah, they believe that you just basically you die and then you cease to exist, which is not very
Mm,
nice. But yeah, but it's the ultimatum. And later in my story, I did leave that because I realized it was wrong, but I wasn't quite fully woken up and enlightened. Well, none of us are, but I wasn't at the stage yet of where I'm at today because I bloody went out of the frying pan and into the fire because then I became something else. I became
mm,
born again Christian. They do believe in hell, but whether it's hell or whether it's ceasing to exist and not being in paradise or whatever it is, it's an ultimatum. And I've always said to people, like they always like to say, "Oh, you got free will. God wants you to have free will. You choose." And I'm like, well, hang on a second. So you're telling me that unless I do X, Y, Z, I'm going to burn in hell. Well, that sounds to me like if I go up to you with a gun and put a gun to your head and say, "Give me your money, or I'm going to shoot you in the head," right? And I shoot you in the head, and then I say, "Yeah, but he had free will. I gave him the choice. He made that decision." But that type of ultimatum, you kind of like you're steered in the decision I want you to make because, of course, you don't want to get shot in the head. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Um, so it's a terrible ultimatum. Yeah. Um, so yeah, it's very much threatening people. I think I would go so far as to say, and I know that a lot of people listening maybe won't like this, but I'll say it anyway. But I think that like that type of preaching is hate preaching, really. Like they profess love and all that, but you're basically going around telling people do this or die, turn or burn. Yeah, is very nasty.
Mhm.
Very nasty. So I did that, and I'm ashamed of those days. But I feel like I'm making up for it now because, like, I'm sort of. I hope I don't have a messiah complex, but I do like to set the captives free, right? Because what I like to do is I like to go to people and say, "Hey, you know what? You're okay." I remember my whole childhood growing up in religion, I was always feeling guilty. Oh, there's a girl with a nice body. Oh shit, I shouldn't be thinking that. You know what I mean? Or,
Mhm.
oh, I've eaten too much. That's gluttony. Or, oh, I watched something that I shouldn't have watched. Or, oh, shit, someone gave me a birthday present and I unwrapped it. There's always this constant guilt. And you're always praying and saying, "Oh God, please forgive me. I'll promise I'll try harder and not to do that again." And like, I mean, it's like the opposite of positive affirmations and personal development, isn't it?
Mhm.
Because you're in such sorrow and you're down, and even your physiology is down, and you're like begging, and you're frightened, and it's just so toxic. And yeah, that was my life, and I believe that um it is a form of abuse. See, when I was growing up, I had a hard childhood. My father was very harsh, said some cruel things. you know I don't think it's a coincidence that I was drawn to the church that pretty much treats you the same way. You think of an abusive relationship with a man and a woman, the man would say to the woman, or a man and a man, it doesn't matter, but where you got like one that's like more domineering and abusive, right? And they say, "Oh, you're nothing without me. You, you need me. You're nothing without me." Well, guess what? That's what they tell you in the church. They tell you it's not just the church; it's the Bible as well. Like you
Narcissistic.
are nothing. Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
exactly. You're nothing. You're nothing. You're only something because of me. You know, and yeah, it's very, very, very toxic. But anyway, so I was hook, line, and sinker. I was into all this. I was a Jehovah's Witness. So then what happened was I had a very like a road to Damascus experience, as they say, um, and what had happened is like they say, and it's true statistically that if you're a Jehovah's Witness, you generally don't. You might like just think, "Oh, I can't be bothered with this anymore," and you just leave. That happens from time to time, but you don't usually change religions because you're so indoctrinated and brainwashed, right? So you don't just start believing something else. That's very rare, right? But I did, and it wasn't even a process. It was very sudden. So one day I was like walking along the beach, and I met this guy, and he told me about the baptism of the Holy Ghost, right? And I said, "Oh," and I thought, "Wow, another synchronicity once again," because I'd just been reading about it in the Bible, and I couldn't believe because I knew the Bible inside out. because they are rigorous studiers of the Bible. I can quote scripture all day long off by heart. Still can, because you learn from a young age, and it's repetitive. So, but anyway, I read this scripture about, I baptize you in water, but he who comes after me, whose sandals I'm unworthy to stoop down and loose, he'll baptize you in the Holy Ghost and fire. And I thought, how come I never read that before? I mean, I must have glanced my eyes over it, but it never registered. And I thought, what's this? And I couldn't believe I'd never heard of it. And then this guy was telling me about it, and I thought, this is an interesting synchronicity. Well, the next thing, he laid his hand on my head and asked me to be filled with the Holy Ghost. And I'd never seen, you see these people in churches, they get slain in the spirit, they fall down
Hmm.
and all that. I'd
Yep.
never seen that before, right? But
Yep.
all of a sudden, so I didn't know what I had no preconceived ideas of what he was talking about, or how I would react. I was used to nothing happening when you pray. But anyway, I fell on the floor, and I couldn't get up for half an hour, and I felt this love that I can't describe. And I was like, oh my goodness, I was like really like intoxicated with love, but not
Hmm.
like a love that I can describe in words. And I was like drunk, and and it was amazing. And then I immediately became Pentecostal, and like was years and years and years in that. Now, when I came away from all of that, I look back and I sort of thought, oh, I'm as maybe hypnotized, it's maybe like parasuggestion, hypnosis. Well, I've come full circle. Now I acknowledge that it was God, but
Hmm.
just not the God that I thought it was. I do believe that I had a divine encounter, but just not it was not as it seemed to me
Yep.
at the time. Um, so
Can I throw
yeah.
an Can I throw
So
an
what
alternate
happened?
Can I throw an alternate theory in there? Can I just throw
Sorry.
just for you to hear? Can I throw
Oh,
an
I
alternate
sorry. Can
idea?
you repeat that?
I was saying, could I
You got
throw
an
an
alternate
alternate idea?
idea? Oh, please
An
do.
alternate idea. So
Oh, please do. I'm listening.
in that moment,
Hmm.
because you are divine yourself, in that moment, whether it came through Pentecostal or whatever, you let
Yeah.
go so much that the essence of the divine or Christ consciousness or Buddha, whatever you want to refer to it,
Hmm.
flowed through you, and you're electrical. You're an electrical being. And so, because you
Yeah.
opened up, you had an awakening moment to a
Yeah.
presence that's out there now. And a lot of those Pentecostals and Catholics and all of them have all had that experience, but then they're oppressed. It's kind of like the abusive spouse. They get drunk and they beat the crap out of their spouse, and the next day they're, I love you, and they're bringing them presents. So,
Mhm.
the church is the abusive spouse. The essence, so
Yeah.
they brought you to a point where you could feel this essence of total and complete love, which is what people experience
Yeah.
through near death experiences or out of body experiences, when they realize that there's something more than what our physical is.
Mm.
And in that moment, but
Oh
then
yeah.
all the abuse starts coming in, the gaslighting and the
Yeah.
oppressing and and stuff like that. So then it makes you doubt it, because remember,
Yeah.
and the agenda is that they have to tell you the truth. They have to give you the truth at some level, but they still want to control you. The rule is that they have to tell you, but they can do whatever
Yeah.
they can. They can also manipulate you into thinking it's not real.
Oh yeah. You mean the church can?
The overarching whatever it is that controls the evil in this world, or
Yeah.
whatever you want to
Oh
call it. I don't even know if it's evil or anything like that, but whatever is
yeah.
oppressing us to keep our light and our energy of who we are from opening up.
Hmm.
So they have to show you and they have to tell you, but
Yeah.
then they do have then they can manipulate you into thinking it's not real. That's why they put it in the movies. That's why they put it in the books, so you think it's fantasy.
Oh
And so
yeah.
then the church, and then you get angry with the church. So then you're at odds, because the idea is to divide your energy inside you. It's called divide and conquer, and it's not just through politics. It's also done through the energy of your own essence. Because
Yeah.
if you're not coming together in oneness, then you are not stepping into your own power. They're afraid of us, whoever this is, and that's in the Gnostics. Remember, they talk about the archons or the archons,
Right.
and they feed off of
Hmm.
our fear. Where we feed off of love, they feed off of our
Mm.
fear. So if they keep us in a fear state,
Yeah.
but they still have to show us a glimpse of who we are, and that was a glimpse of
Yeah.
who you are. So,
Yeah.
at least in
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
mind.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that's very interesting. I enjoyed that. You, you're alternate view. I think that you're right. And interestingly, actually, you were talking about that. And even, yes, the church, because guess what? So when I had that experience, I didn't know, I'd never heard the word Pentecostal. I didn't know what kind of church to join. Little did I know, I don't have to join any bloody church, right?
Mhm.
That's where I'm at now. But of course, then I thought, oh, I must join a church now, right? Because, okay, so anyway, um, I was told it was from the devil, that my experience, because it was a non-Pentecostal church. It took me a while to find a
Mhm.
charismatic Pentecostal church, but I went to more of a reserved one and said, "Oh, that was the devil," anyway, but here's the thing, as well, is that, and this pisses me off. Um, the church believe they have exclusivity of experiences with God, healing, right? If it's done outside of the church, right, then it's like from the devil. Yeah. So there's people say, oh yeah, meditation's demonic, yoga's demonic. If anyone who does any type of healing, energy healing or anything, Reiki, is all demonic. So they believe that they totally have exclusivity on all these like gifts.
Mhm.
And that was very damaging because I obviously had to think, well, okay, things are happening in my life, because it wasn't just that one experience. I had many, many, many like visions and like all kinds of things going on, like supernaturally. And of course, I was like, um, I had to um, kind of come to terms with it and explain it all in a Christian doctrine manner, right? Because I was brainwashed into believing that it has to be, because there is nothing else, and there
Mhm.
bloody well is.
There definitely
Yeah,
is. There definitely is. They
yeah,
they whoever they is has lied to us at so many levels, and I really think it's a part of our
mm,
consciousness that
yeah,
because if diamonds and pearls are formed through pressure or friction, and
yeah,
as we create this pressure or friction, we become these beautiful things. um,
mm,
and so I think that
oh yeah,
really what our part of our consciousness is creating this adversity in our life so that we can rise above it. And so,
oh yeah,
and then these are all just tools and pawns or actors in this movie that we've created here. So
yeah,
whatever, we can use whatever metaphor we want. We could sit here. We could do a whole show and we'll just talk
yeah.
in metaphors.
I know exactly. But let me ask you this: like for anyone watching this discussion, and if someone feels disillusioned or unfulfilled in their current like spiritual path, maybe they're institutionalized and they're going to church or whatever, right? Um, but for them to like think for themselves, to get their own revelations, and to feel at peace with that, and to not feel that there's any condemnation or damnation to result from it. And like for someone like wanting to stretch their spiritual legs and go their own way or whatever, with a clear conscience, like what advice would you give to anyone listening that wants that wants to do that?
It's funny you should say that. I just gave this presentation at a church on Sunday, and when I was on the way
Hmm.
there, I got this thought:
Oh yeah,
whatever created us, whether it be us
yeah.
or another god above us, whatever, it doesn't really matter in this conversation, created
Hmm.
us in a way where we have this thing called free will, and we're so
Hmm.
terrified because of our upbringing to make a mistake. And no doubt some decisions are going to cause more pain than others. And with that being
Hmm.
said, don't be afraid to take a step forward and do something and experience something. So if you don't feel okay, pain, I always look at it as pay attention inward now. Meaning, if you have pain or anxiety or something going on within you that doesn't feel right, stop and say, well, what is it I should be doing? And listen to your inner voice. Your inner voice will tell you, hey, this is not working out. This is not something that's going to be good for you, or this doesn't feel right. And be okay with not doing it. So our other disease in this
Hmm.
planet is called codependency. And so we will do things without, because we know we don't want to do it. Like if you don't want to go out one night to dinner and you did maybe 2 days beforehand, but today something's just coming up and you just really don't want to go and it doesn't feel right.
mm,
And you end up going
yeah,
anyways, and you end up being sick, with some kind of flu or something like that. Or you
yeah,
don't go and you prevent yourself from doing that. Follow your inner feelings, I guess, and you let your feelings are your emotional GPS, so to speak. And
I love that.
allow yourself to pay attention to this emotion because what you've been doing, and a lot of us have been doing, is ignoring ourselves because we've been
Mhm,
told that we should be obedient and
mm,
follow. That includes to all of our friends and loved ones and our parents around us. And and it's one of those things where when a lot of times, and we can all relate to this, when we make take leaps of faith and go do things, people will
mm,
have all kinds of opinions about the way we should be or do. And I
mm,
say, follow your gut and what your heart and your gut is saying, because that is the true divineness in you.
oh, yeah,
And so, but the free will there is like sometimes, we don't have the perspective of higher consciousness and stuff like that. So you may run into a wall somewhere and be like, oh, well, that's not the place to go. And then you turn around and you go somewhere else. And that's just a metaphor to say, it's okay to make a mistake because they're just
yeah,
opportunities to give you more discernment and more wisdom. And you're
mm,
not going to get it if you don't go out there and experience it. You can't get it by sitting in a corner being afraid. Um, and so
yeah,
it's just one of those things where, you know, I mean, yours and Daniela's story is one of those, where you guys both took a leap of faith and look how amazing its work turned out. So, I mean, and watching you
absolutely.
guys grow and getting to know you over the past, 4 years, 4 or 5 years, and stuff
Thank
like
you.
that has been great because
Mm,
if we look
thank
back at
you.
our lives, we've had to let go of things that were very dear to us.
Mm,
But I mean, I've had to do it. A lot of people have to do it. It doesn't mean that things we've let go of don't come back. It just means that
mhm,
they're not meant to be in our life right now, or whatever it is, a
mm,
person or a situation or an item or whatever, and it can come back around. I mean, we've all experienced that too. So just go out there and live your
yeah,
life and live in the now and the moment.
yeah.
So, but
Well, that I couldn't have said it better. I mean, that's amazing. I agree with you 100%. So, like, basically, you're saying to people, trust yourself. Yes, you'll make mistakes, but follow
mhm,
your inner GPS, as you call it, which is a great
mhm,
analogy. I love that. And yeah, and you know what I've always said is that, like, do you really need to know thou shalt not murder? Like, you know what I mean?
you
Like,
don't need to
if
know that. You already know it's
it's
not
like,
right.
yeah, like this isn't my quote. This is a quote from, I don't know who it was, but they said that if you need religion to know right from wrong, is not religion you need, it's empathy. I mean, like, you know what I mean? Like, we do not need, like, the Ten Commandments. That's a whole big subject. I just think it's ridiculous because at the time, well, first off, Moses murdered everybody. Well, not everybody, 5,000 men,
Mhm,
because women and children were bullshit in the Bible. They didn't count as a number, right? So
mhm,
it was, 5,000 men, right? The same when the exile from Egypt, it was like the number was the number of men. Yeah. So because children and women are like, they don't count.
right.
Yeah. So he just said, like, he just brought down the tablets, "Thou shalt not murder," and then he killed a load of people. Um, and
Hypocrite.
there was nothing about, yeah, you don't own a slave, because obviously, well, that was okay to own a slave. Yeah, there was a lot of opportunity. The first four commandments of the 10 were a bit of a waste of, great opportunity. Let's, like, address some serious issues. And the first four commandments were appealing to God's jealousy. So,
Mhm,
but yeah, so we don't need the laws or the commandments, because you know what, like, majority of people are good people, I believe. Um, and we're okay. We're okay, and we can grow and become even better
mhm.
without all of that. You know.
Absolutely. You got it. And that's the way it is.
Mm,
And then I think if we just touch people's hearts, because we have to start with our
mhm,
own, we have to touch our own hearts, and
mm,
then we'll see great changes in this world. So, and I really think that people are waking up because they're getting tired. I mean, they're going through those stages of grief, and one of those is anger. Um, And so there's a lot
Yeah.
of anger in the world right now, but you have to get through anger before you can see the light of who you are and what is really the truth. So, but,
Yeah. Yeah. You do. You do.
so
I agree. I agree. And actually, it's interesting because, on the topic of religion, I don't know about you, it'd be interesting to hear your view. But yeah, I did feel angry with religion when I first like deconverted or unlearned or whatever. I felt quite angry, and it doesn't pay to be that way because um, then that's another problem. Whoops.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, but
But when you're on camera,
okay.
you start seeing your gray hairs.
Oh, really? Oh
I'm
dear.
just being silly. I'm being silly.
Oh yeah, you're
Um,
probably right. Or maybe the way the light's shining, I don't know. Yeah.
Next thing you know,
Well,
I'll have beautiful gray hair.
uh, yeah. Shall I end the recording, or I can
Yeah,
edit this
yeah,
conversation out. But
yeah.
shall I end it, or do you wanna like any final thoughts, or
Yeah, well, my final thought is for everybody is that
yeah,
just
go for
be
it.
good to the first thing is love yourself, be good to yourself. And I give this to all
Mhm.
my clients. Go in front of the mirror for the next week and look at yourself eye to eye in your eyes and say for 5 minutes, I love myself. I love you. And you have to specifically say not I love myself, I love you and say your name. I can guarantee
Mhm.
you most of you are going to struggle with it because you've never loved yourself and not in
Mhm.
that level. And if you are loving yourself, you're loving God. So,
Mhm.
because the
Yeah.
essence of God is within us. And you are the temple of God to live within us, which is our soul. So, if you're loving that, imagine that energy just feeling loved and nourished. And it's been begging you to listen. And it wants you to come back home and face itself. And that's within you. So, yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's great advice. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for watching. I'll probably do an outro or something, so I'll just go ahead and end it now.